The blue lights hit your rearview mirror before your brain even processes what's happening. 1 second you're driving home, thinking about dinner or a deadline, and the next, your chest tightens just a little. You check your speed. You replay the last few seconds in your head. Was that a full stop? Did you signal early enough? You pull over, engine idling, hands hovering awkwardly over the steering wheel as the officer steps out of the cruiser behind you. Let me ask you something, and I want you to really think about it before you answer. Have you ever been in a traffic stop where you weren't sure whether you were helping yourself or accidentally making things worse? Drop your answer in the comments, because what most people think they know about traffic stops is often incomplete. And later in this story, I'm going to walk you through a mistake that even confident, educated drivers make without realizing the consequences. Now let's get into a situation that sounds almost like a movie plot, but the reality behind it is far more common than people want to admit. A law student, not even fully licensed yet, ends up in a courtroom going head-to-head with a police officer whose behavior during a traffic stop raised serious red flags. Not just minor procedural issues, but patterns. Patterns that suggested something deeper, something intentional. And here's where things get interesting, because this wasn't just about a traffic ticket anymore. This turned into a lesson about how power works on the roadside, how pressure builds in small moments, and how one person who understands the law just a little better than average can completely change the outcome. Picture the initial stop. Late afternoon, nothing unusual. The officer pulls the driver over for what he claims is a failure to maintain lane. That's one of those vague justifications you'll hear often. It gives officers a wide range of discretion. Maybe you drifted slightly. Maybe you didn't. Maybe the officer just needed a reason to initiate contact. The student pulls over properly. That part matters more than people think. Location, timing, how quickly you respond. Officers are already forming opinions about you before they even reach your window. The officer approaches, and here's the first subtle moment where things start to build tension. Do you know why I stopped you? That question sounds harmless, but it's not neutral. It's strategic. It's designed to see if you'll admit something. Most people feel compelled to answer honestly, or worse, guess. I might have drifted a little. That single sentence can be enough to support the officer's narrative later. But this student pauses. Not in a confrontational way, just a calm, deliberate pause. I'm not sure, officer. That response doesn't give anything away. It doesn't escalate. It doesn't challenge. It simply avoids self-incrimination. Now pay attention here, because this is where many drivers unintentionally shift the tone of the entire encounter. The officer asks for license and registration. The student complies. Hands visible, movements slow. That's exactly what you want to do. But then comes the next wave of questioning. Where are you coming from? Where are you headed? How long have you been driving tonight? These questions aren't random. They're part of a behavioral baseline. Officers are trained to look for inconsistencies, hesitation, nervousness, changes in tone. They're not just listening to your answers, they're studying how you answer. And here's something most people don't realize. Even perfectly innocent drivers can appear suspicious under pressure. Your voice tightens, you over-explain, you try to sound cooperative, but you end up sounding rehearsed. This student answers minimally. From school, going home. Short, direct, no extra details. The officer lingers, takes the documents, walks back to the patrol car. And this is another moment people underestimate. Time. How long the officer keeps your documents matters, because legally, the stop is supposed to be limited in scope and duration. It can't just drag on indefinitely without justification, but in reality, many stops stretch longer than necessary, especially if the officer is fishing for something more. 5 minutes pass, then 10. The officer returns, but instead of issuing a warning or ticket, he changes direction. Mind if I ask you a few more questions? That phrasing is important. Mind if suggests optional, but the context doesn't feel optional, does it? You're still on the side of the road. Your documents are still in his hand. Most people feel like they can't say no. This is where the law student does something subtle but powerful. I'd prefer to keep this limited to the reason for the stop. No aggression, no attitude, just a boundary. And you can almost feel the shift. The officer's tone tightens slightly, not overtly hostile but different. Step out of the vehicle. Now, legally, officers do have the authority to ask drivers to step out during a traffic stop. That's been upheld repeatedly. But the timing matters. The context matters. The student complies. Standing on the roadside, the pressure increases. Cars passing by. The feeling of exposure. This is where a lot of people start talking more than they should, just to fill the silence. The officer begins circling the vehicle, looking inside. Not searching yet, but observing. This is another critical distinction. Observation doesn't require probable cause. Searching does. Anything illegal in the car? Another classic question, another trap. No. Mind if I take a look? And here it is, the moment that changes everything. Consent. Most searches during traffic stops happen because drivers say yes. Not because the officer had legal grounds, but because the driver didn't feel comfortable refusing. The student says calmly, "I do not consent to any searches." That's it. No explanation, no argument. And now the officer has a decision to make. Either he has enough legal justification to proceed anyway, or he doesn't. In this case, he doesn't. But instead of ending the stop, he shifts tactics again. He calls for backup. Now think about what that does psychologically. One officer becomes two, then maybe three. The situation starts to feel more serious, even if nothing has changed legally. This is where many drivers crack, not because they're guilty, but because the pressure becomes overwhelming. The student stays consistent. Minimal answers, no consent, no sudden movements, no emotional reactions. Eventually, the officer issues a citation and lets him go. Most people would take that outcome and move on, but this student didn't, because something felt off. The length of the stop, the repeated attempts to extend it, the shift in tone, the request for a search without clear justification. So he did what most people never do. He fought it. And this is where the story transitions from roadside tension to courtroom strategy. In court, the officer's report painted a very clean picture. Reasonable suspicion, nervous behavior, justification for extended questioning. But the student had something the officer didn't expect: preparation. He didn't just argue emotionally, he broke down the timeline, minute by minute. He pointed out when the purpose of the stop should have concluded. He highlighted inconsistencies between the officer's report and standard procedure. And then came the moment that changed everything. He brought up the officer's past conduct. Now, this isn't something you can just throw into a case without basis. Courts don't allow random character attacks. But if there's a documented pattern, complaints, prior rulings, disciplinary records, it can become relevant, especially if it relates to credibility. And that's exactly what happened. The officer had a history of extending traffic stops beyond their lawful scope, not always resulting in discipline, but enough to establish a pattern. Suddenly, the narrative shifted. This wasn't just about one stop anymore. It was about behavior. The judge started asking different questions, not just what happened, but why did it happen this way? And here's where things get uncomfortable, especially if you've ever assumed that officers always operate within clear legal boundaries. Because the reality is more complicated. Most officers follow the rules, but some push them. Not necessarily out of malice, but out of habit, pressure, or a belief that the ends justify the means. Fishing expeditions, prolonged stops, subtle coercion for consent. These things happen. And unless someone challenges them, they continue. The student didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He simply laid out the facts, connected the dots, and let the pattern speak for itself. The citation was dismissed, but more importantly, the officer's conduct was formally questioned in a way that could impact future cases. Now, let's pause on that for a second, because this isn't just a story about one person winning in court. It's a case study in how small decisions during a traffic stop can echo much further than you expect. Think about how easily this could have gone differently. If the student had admitted to drifting, even casually, if he had agreed to additional questioning, if he had consented to a search, if he had reacted emotionally when the situation escalated, any one of those choices could have changed the outcome completely. And this is where I want to challenge a common belief. A lot of people think being cooperative means saying yes to everything, answering every question, agreeing to every request. But cooperation and compliance are not the same thing. You can be respectful, calm, and non-confrontational while still protecting your rights. That balance is difficult, especially in the moment, especially when adrenaline is involved. Officers are trained for these interactions. Most drivers are not. That's why hesitation matters, silence matters, word choice matters. Even something as simple as how quickly you answer can influence how the officer perceives you. Too fast and it seems rehearsed, too slow and it seems evasive, too detailed and it raises new questions, too short and it can feel uncooperative. There's a constant, subtle negotiation happening, even if you don't realize it. And here's another layer people rarely talk about. Passengers. If you have someone else in the car, the dynamic changes instantly. Officers may separate you, ask the same questions to each person, look for inconsistencies. Passengers often feel less prepared and more likely to talk freely, which can unintentionally create complications. I think we were coming from dinner, or was it the movies? That kind of uncertainty can raise suspicion, even if it's completely innocent. Then there's the issue of tone. An officer might start friendly, almost casual, then shift to more direct questioning, then back again. That's not random, it's deliberate. It's designed to see how you respond to different types of pressure. Do you relax when they're friendly and start talking more? Do you become defensive when they're direct? Do you change your story slightly without realizing it? All of these reactions are being observed. And here's the part that makes people uncomfortable. You might do everything right and still feel like you're being treated as suspicious. Because from the officer's perspective, every stop has potential risk. They don't know you. They don't know your intentions. They're trained to assume uncertainty. That doesn't justify overstepping legal boundaries, but it explains the mindset. Understanding that mindset can help you navigate the situation more effectively, not by playing games, but by staying grounded, keeping your hands visible, avoiding sudden movements, speaking clearly but not excessively, knowing when to answer and when to decline, and most importantly, recognizing when a situation is shifting beyond a routine stop. Because that shift can be subtle, a longer pause, a repeated question, a request that feels slightly outside the original reason for the stop. That's when awareness matters most. Now think back to that opening moment, the blue lights, the uncertainty. Most people go into that situation hoping it ends quickly, but hope isn't a strategy. Understanding is. And the difference between those two things can determine whether a simple stop stays simple or turns into something much more complicated. So the next time you see those lights in your mirror and your mind starts racing, ask yourself one quiet question before the officer even reaches your window. Am I about to help myself, or accidentally make this harder than it needs to be? Because in that moment, before a single word is spoken, the outcome has already started to take shape.